The moment Rick slipped my father's gold watch onto his wrist, I felt something twist in my gut. We stood in my living room, surrounded by half-eaten casseroles and whispered condolences. Dad had been gone 3 days, and the memorial lunch filled our house with people who barely knew him. Rick adjusted the watch band, admiring how the gold caught the afternoon light, streaming through the window. "Don't worry, Tom," he said, grinning at me like we were old friends. "I'll just keep it for a while, to remember him." My wife Elaine touched his arm gently, her eyes soft with sympathy for her brother. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile, but my throat felt tight. That watch had been in our family for 4 generations. My grandfather wore it through World War II. My father wore it on his wedding day and on mine. The Hamilton's golden face had marked every important moment of my 58 years. And now Rick Dalton, who'd met my father maybe 6 times, claimed it as a comfort item. I wanted to grab his wrist, demand he take it off. But everyone was watching, expecting me to be gracious, understanding. So I nodded and turned away, swallowing the words that burned in my mouth. For days passed before I gathered the courage to check. The mahogany box where Dad's things had been carefully stored sat on my dresser, exactly where I placed it after the funeral. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Empty. The watch was gone, along with his reading glasses and the fountain pen he'd used to sign every court document during his 40 years as a magistrate. I stood there, staring at the bare velvet interior, feeling something crack inside my chest. "Elaine," I called downstairs, keeping my voice steady. She appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. "What's wrong?" I showed her the empty box. Her face softened with that patient expression she used when she thought I was being difficult. "Rick just needed comfort, honey. He was close to your father." That was a lie. Rick had avoided family gatherings for years, always too busy with his real estate deals. He asked for the other things too. She sighed. "Don't start drama, Tom. Not now. Everyone's grieving." I closed the box carefully, feeling small and unheard in my own home. The betrayal wasn't just Rick's anymore. Sunday dinner became my personal torture. Rick showed up wearing the watch, making sure everyone noticed. He'd tap it meaningfully during conversations, adjusted ostentatiously while reaching for the breadbasket. "Guess I'm the favorite son now," he joked, winking at Elaine's mother across the table. She laughed, delighted. Elaine smiled nervously, glancing at me. I forced myself to grin, to play along, to be the bigger person. But inside, humiliation burned like acid. My stepdaughter Mia, 17 and sharp-eyed, watched the exchange with a frown. She'd loved my father, spent countless afternoons listening to his stories about the old courthouse. But she said nothing, and neither did I. After dinner, Rick cornered me in the kitchen. "You're being weird about the watch, Tom. It's just metal and gears." He spoke loud enough for others to hear, establishing the narrative that I was the problem. "Your dad would want someone to appreciate it, not lock it in a drawer." People nodded in agreement. I rinsed dishes in silence, my hands shaking with suppressed rage. That night, I lay awake beside Elaine, feeling the distance between us grow wider. She'd chosen her brother's comfort over my grief, and we both knew it. The garage held 30 years of my father's careful organization. He'd labeled every box, dated every document, maintained order even as his body failed him. I moved through the space slowly, touching things he'd touched, breathing air thick with the smell of old paper and machine oil. In a dusty corner behind his workbench, I found an envelope wedged between 2 boxes of legal files. My hands froze when I pulled it free. The pawn slip inside was dated 2 days after the funeral. Vintage gold Hamilton pocket watch, engraved excellent condition. The listed value made my stomach drop, $850. At the bottom, in photocopied handwriting, the seller's name screamed at me, Rick Dalton. The paper crumpled in my fist as cold understanding flooded through me. He hadn't kept a watch to remember my father. He'd sold my family's legacy for less than $1,000 before my father's grave marker had even been installed. I sat on the concrete floor, the pawn slip burning in my hand, feeling the last threads of family loyalty snap. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was theft. This was erasure. And Rick had worn that watch to dinner, bold as brass, knowing I'd never check, never fight back, never make waves. He'd calculated my weakness perfectly, but he'd also left evidence. The backyard barbecue happened 3 weeks later. Elaine's idea to bring everyone together. I stood by the grill, forcing burgers onto paper plates. The pawn slip folded in my pocket like a loaded weapon. Rick arrived late, the watch gleaming on his wrist. Same watch he'd supposedly pawned. My confusion lasted only seconds before understanding clicked. He bought it back, or worse, pawned it multiple times. I cornered him near the drink cooler, keeping my voice low and steady. I found the receipt, Rick, from Turner's Pawn, 2 days after the funeral. His face went blank for one beautiful second before the mask slid back into place. You calling me a thief, old man? His voice rose, drawing attention. I borrowed against it. That's all. Had a cash flow problem. Already bought it back, as you can see. He raised his wrist dramatically. Elaine materialized beside us, eyes flashing warning at me. Tom, you're grieving. Don't make this ugly in front of everyone. Mia stood nearby, phone in hand, watching with narrowed eyes. But everyone else nodded agreement with Elaine. I was the problem. I was making drama. I was unstable, paranoid, unable to let things go. Rick smirked, knowing he'd won this round. I walked away, humiliated, while he held court near the grill, the victim of an ungrateful brother-in-law's accusations. The next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in my own life. Elaine's mother called, concerned about my behavior. Elaine's sister stopped inviting us to family events. At church, people who'd known my father for decades suddenly found reasons to avoid conversation. Rick's version of events had spread like poison. I was the grieving son who couldn't handle his father's death, who'd turned suspicious and cruel, who'd accuse a good man of theft over a simple misunderstanding. Mia spent more time at friend houses. Elaine worked late, avoiding me. At dinner, when we bothered to eat together, silence hung between us like a wall. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, I said one night. Elaine didn't look up from her plate. You're not making it easy, Tom. Rick showed everyone receipts proving he bought the watch back. Why can't you just accept his explanation? Because pawn slips don't lie. Because my father's memory deserved better. Because theft is theft, no matter how well it's packaged. But I said none of that. Instead, I nodded and cleared the table, feeling the isolation wrap tighter around my chest. Rick had won the war for family sympathy. He'd painted me as unstable, and everyone had bought the picture. The manipulation was complete, surgical, devastating. And I had no move left except one: silence. Turner's Pawn sat on the east side of town, squeezed between a check-cashing place and a tattoo parlor. I'd driven past it 1,000 times without noticing. Now I studied it like a battlefield. The owner, Frank Turner, looked up from behind bulletproof glass when I entered. 70s, silver beard, eyes that had seen every sad story humanity offered. Help you? I described the watch without mentioning names. Frank's expression shifted immediately. The Hamilton. Yeah, I remember that piece. Beautiful craftsmanship. Came in twice, actually. My pulse hammered. Twice. He nodded slowly. Can't give you customer details. You understand. Privacy laws. But that watch, it told a story. He leaned forward, voice dropping. First time, guy seemed desperate. Second time, maybe 3 weeks later, he seemed smug, like he'd pulled something over on someone. I thanked him and left, legs unsteady. Rick had pawned it twice. Sold my father's legacy like he was flipping used cars. But Frank couldn't testify without violating privacy laws. The truth existed provable, but just out of legal reach. I sat in my truck in the parking lot, watching people come and go. Each one carried stories of desperation, of items that meant more than their dollar value. And I realized something crucial. The law might protect Rick's privacy, but it also protected my right to investigate. Quietly, carefully, legally. The safe deposit key emerged from a folder of my father's tax returns, small and brass, and labeled a number I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a full minute before understanding hit. Dad had always been thorough, always prepared. The next morning, I drove to First National, where he'd banked for 40 years. The manager, Patricia, remembered him fondly. She led me to the vault, inserted her master key alongside Dad's, and left me alone with a metal box. Inside lay documents I'd never known existed. His original will, handwritten on legal paper in his precise magistrate script, dated 5 years before the stroke that had eventually taken him. The formal will file with his lawyer had been simpler, dividing assets equally. But this older document contained specific bequests, items with sentimental value, rather than monetary worth. And there, in paragraph 7, clear as daylight, the Hamilton pocket watch, carried by my father and grandfather before me, shall remain with my son, Tom Harrington, as keeper of our family's memory and mark of our name's continuation. I photographed every page with shaking hands. This wasn't just preference. This was documented intent, legally valid as a testamentary letter under state law. Dad had known, somehow, that the watch might need protecting. He'd left me ammunition. I returned the box, thanked Patricia, and drove home feeling something shift. The underdog had just found his weapon. "Let's have dinner," I said to Elaine 3 days later. "A real one. Invite everyone. I want to make peace." She looked at me with surprise and cautious hope. "Really?" I smiled, meaning it this time. "Really? No more fighting. Life's too short." The dinner party took shape over the next week. Elaine's whole family came, Rick and his wife Monica, Elaine's mother, her sister, and brother-in-law. Mia agreed to attend, though she watched me with curious suspicion. I grilled steaks, opened good wine, played the perfect host. Rick arrived last, wearing the watch. Of course. He clapped my shoulder like we were best friends. "Good to see you coming around, Tom. Family is what matters." Over dinner, I steered conversation toward Dad, toward family values, toward the importance of honoring those who came before us. Everyone nodded along, pleased to see me healing. Rick took the bait beautifully. "Your father was a great man," he said, raising his wine glass. "That's why I treasure this watch so much. It connects me to his legacy." He tapped the watch face meaningfully. "Reminds me every day what really matters." I smiled and nodded, watching him perform, watching everyone believe him, and I realized with perfect clarity that I stood completely alone. Even Mia, who'd sensed something wrong, couldn't see through Rick's polished lies. The isolation was total. But total isolation, I'd learned, meant total freedom. No one expected anything from the broken, grieving son anymore, which meant I could move without anyone watching. Marjorie Kane had been my father's attorney for 30 years. She drafted his will, handled his estate, attended his funeral with genuine tears. Now she sat across from me in her downtown office, reading the handwritten document I'd found in the safe deposit box. "This is valid," she said finally, looking up over her reading glasses. "As a testamentary letter, it clarifies intent regarding specific bequests. The formal will doesn't contradict it, just doesn't mention these items." I explained everything, the theft, the pawning, Rick's manipulation. She listened without interrupting, making occasional notes. "The challenge," she said carefully, "is that possession is 9/10. Rick could claim your father gave him the watch verbally. Your wife's testimony might support that version. What if I could prove he pawned it? Multiple times?" Her expression sharpened. "That changes things. Pawning inherited property for personal gain. When documented intent exists otherwise, that's conversion, theft by another name." She leaned back, fingers steepled. "I can send a formal demand letter, cite the testamentary document, threaten civil action. Most people fold when lawyers get involved. It's quiet, legal, and if done correctly, deeply humiliating for the other party." I thought about Rick's smug face, his jokes, the way he'd turned my family against me. How humiliating. Marjorie smiled thinly. "Devastating, if you want it to be. The truth is a precision instrument, Tom. We just have to aim it correctly." I left her office feeling something new. Not rage, not grief, but cold, calculated purpose. The game had changed. And this time I knew the rules. Frank called on a Tuesday morning, voice excited. That Hamilton watch? It came back in. Someone sold it again last week. Different guy this time, but I recognized the piece. Been in my business 40 years. I remember the special ones. My coffee went cold in my hand. It's still there. In my case right now. You interested? 30 minutes later, I stood at Frank's counter, the watch resting on velvet between us. The engraving on the back, still perfect. For James Harrington, 1943, time and tide. My grandfather's name, the year he shipped out to Europe. I'd traced those letters with my finger as a child, listening to Dad's stories. How much? I asked. Frank named a price. Higher than the pawn value, but fair for the piece's actual worth. I paid cash, hand steady despite the emotion crushing my chest. Frank wrapped it carefully, but before handing it over, he photocopied his purchase receipt. Something tells me you might need proof of legal ownership, he said quietly. Just a hunch. I thanked him, unable to speak past a lump in my throat. In my truck, I unwound the watch and held up to the light. The gold gleamed, untarnished by Rick's betrayal. The mechanism ticked steadily, reliable, honest. My father's heartbeat, reclaimed. I bought back my own family's legacy, like a stranger at an estate sale. But I had it now, and more importantly, I had documentation. The power balance had just shifted. Sunday brunch happened at Elaine's mother's house, the usual gathering of her extended family. I dressed carefully, wearing my father's watch on a chain tucked into my vest pocket. Subtle, barely visible. But there, Rick arrived 15 minutes late, holding forth about a real estate deal. He'd stopped wearing the watch. I noticed. Had he finally pawned it for good? Thinking I'd never know? We settled around the table, passing plates of eggs and bacon. Halfway through the meal, I checked the time, making the motion obvious. I pulled the watch from my pocket, studied its face, and tucked it away again. The table went silent. Rick's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His face drained of color, then flushed red. Where did you get that? His voice cracked slightly. I met his eyes, smiling calmly. Guess it found its way home. Elaine's fork clattered against her plate. Her mother's hand froze over the buttered dish. Monica stared at her husband with dawning confusion. Rick tried to recover. I thought. His usual polish abandoned him. Words tumbled out wrong. You must have found another one, or... The silence stretched, electric and terrible. Mia watched from across the table, eyes wide, phone discreetly aimed at Rick's face. Everyone waited for him to explain. And he couldn't, because any explanation required admitting he'd pawned it. Excuse me. Rick pushed back from the table and fled toward the bathroom. The meal continued in uncomfortable quiet. Everyone suddenly finding their food fascinating. But the seed was planted. Rick's perfect facade had cracked. That night, Elaine erupted. We stood in our bedroom, her face flushed with fury, voice shaking. You humiliated my brother in front of everyone, made him look like a criminal. I kept my voice low, steady. He pawned my father's memory. Twice, for cash. You don't know that. She was crying now, angry tears. You're obsessed. You're making everyone miserable, Rick explained. He borrowed against it during a rough patch. That's not theft. I pulled out my phone, showed her Frank's receipt. I bought this back from Turner's Pawn last Tuesday. Rick sold it again 3 weeks ago. The third time, Elaine, how many rough patches does one man need? She stared at the screen, face working. Then she shook her head. You're twisting things. You probably bought a similar watch just to hurt him. The denial was absolute, impenetrable. I'd shown her proof, and she rejected reality rather than admit her brother's guilt. This is our marriage, she said quietly. Rick is my family. If you keep attacking him, I don't know if I can. She left the sentence unfinished. I sat on the edge of our bed, feeling the fracture widen. 23 years of marriage, weighed against her brother's lies. And she was choosing him. The truth hurt more than I'd expected, but it also clarified things. I wasn't fighting for Rick's admission anymore. I was fighting for my own integrity, for Dad's memory, for the principle that theft shouldn't wear a family face. And if that cost me my marriage, then maybe the marriage wasn't worth what I paid for it. I won't stop, I said finally. I'm sorry, but I won't. She left the room. I heard her crying in the guest bedroom, and I felt nothing but cold, clear resolve. I didn't mean to overhear. I'd come downstairs for water, moving quietly through the dark house. Rick's voice drifted from the patio where he stood talking on his phone. Unaware, I could hear through the open window. I know. Just give me 2 more weeks. The payment's coming, I swear. His voice carried desperation I'd never heard before. It's not like I want to go this deep. The horses just weren't running right, you know? Bad streak. But I'm working something out with my sister. She'll co-sign. She just doesn't know it yet. My water glass stopped halfway to my lips. Horses. Gambling. Debt. Elaine's name. The pieces assembled themselves with horrible clarity. Rick wasn't a successful real estate agent. He was drowning, using family sympathy as a life raft. The watch hadn't been about comfort or memory. It had been emergency cash. And apparently it wasn't enough. I retreated upstairs silently, mind racing. Mia sat on the landing, also awake, also having heard. She looked at me with frightened eyes. Uncle Rick's in trouble? I nodded slowly. Don't say anything yet. Let me handle this. But she shook her head. He's going to hurt Mom. Use her credit, right? That's what he meant. Smart girl. Too smart for her own peace. I'll protect her, I promised. I promise, Mia. She hugged me then, first time in weeks. I knew something was wrong. I knew you weren't crazy. I held my stepdaughter, feeling protective rage build. Rick had betrayed my father's memory. Now he was planning to betray my wife's trust. The quiet game I'd been playing just became a race against time. Frank met me at Turner's Pawn the next morning. You look like hell, Tom. I need those records. The transactions. Everything you have on Rick Dalton. He studied me carefully. You know I can't officially release customer information. Privacy laws are strict, and I could lose my license. I nodded, defeated. But then Frank pulled a folder from under his counter. However, if certain photocopies happen to be in my recycling bin, and you happen to look through that bin before trash pickup, well... He pushed the folder toward me. I got no use for men who sell family heirlooms. Bad for business, bad for karma. Inside were copies of everything. 3 separate pawn transactions. Rick's driver's license photo. His signature on receipts. Dates, amounts, terms. The entire documented history of his theft. Why help me? I asked. Frank's expression hardened. My daddy gave me a pocket knife when I was 8. Carried it 40 years until I lost it in a divorce. Regret it every day. Family things matter, Tom. Your brother-in-law needs to learn that lesson. I thanked him, unable to express how much this meant. But Frank waved me off. Just make sure truth wins. That's payment enough. In my truck, I studied the documents carefully. Each transaction showed escalating desperation. First pawn, $850. Second, $900. Third, $1,000. Rick had been squeezing every dollar from my father's legacy. And these weren't rough patches. This was systematic extraction. I drove to a copy shop, made duplicate of everything, stored originals in my own safe deposit box. Then I sat in my truck, watching traffic, building my case. Rick had dug his hole deep. Time to let him keep digging while I prepared the evidence to bury him. Rick called the family meeting himself, gathering everyone at his house on a Wednesday evening. Elaine said he'd been concerned about my behavior and wanted to address things constructively. I arrived last deliberately. The living room held the usual cast. Elaine, her mother, her sister, Rick, and Monica. Even Mia had been summoned. Rick stood like a prosecutor, face arranged in wounded dignity. Tom, we love you, but your accusations are tearing this family apart. Monica and I think you need to apologize, acknowledge you were wrong, and we can all move forward. He gestured magnanimously, offering me the chance to surrender. Elaine watched me hopefully. Her mother nodded encouragement. Only Mia and Monica looked uncomfortable. I sat down slowly, pulling the folder from my jacket. Before I apologize, I'd like everyone to see something. Rick's confidence flickered. Tom, don't. I laid out the pawn receipts across his coffee table. 3 transactions. All dated. All signed. All showing Rick Dalton selling a gold Hamilton pocket watch. The room went silent. Rick's face drained a color, then flushed crimson. Elaine leaned forward, hand shaking as she picked up the top receipt. What is this? Her voice barely whispered. Documentation. I said quietly. Of 3 separate times Rick pawned my father's watch. Not borrowed against it. Sold it. For cash. The last time was 3 weeks before I bought it back myself. Monica stood abruptly, face pale. Rick? What is he talking about? The silence stretched, terrible and complete. Rick's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. Finally, Elaine looked up at me with something breaking behind her eyes. Realization. Betrayal. Understanding. You knew, she whispered. You knew the whole time. Rick tried damage control immediately. He called Elaine that night, voice smooth again, confident. I heard her side of the conversation through our bedroom door. Tom manufactured those receipts. He's been planning this for weeks, trying to turn you against me. You know how he gets obsessive. She was silent, listening. Think about it, Rick continued, voice carrying through her phone speaker. The pawn shop owner probably helped him forge everything. They're friends now, right? Tom's been going there. This is a setup. I waited, barely breathing. Would she believe him again? Would the years of conditioning override what she'd seen with her own eyes? I need to go, Elaine said finally and hung up. We sat on opposite sides of the bed, a canyon between us. Did you forge them? She asked. No. She turned to look at me. Show me your father's letter. The one from the safe deposit box. I retrieved it from my study, handed it over. She read slowly, lips moving slightly. When she finished, tears ran down her cheeks. He wanted you to have it, Dad. He specifically wrote that you should keep it. Yes. Her hands crumpled the paper slightly. And I told you not to make drama. I called you paranoid. I chose Rick over you. I said nothing. What could I say? She was right. The church, she whispered. The rumors. They came from Rick, didn't they? He spread the story that you were unstable. Probably. Rick had always been good at controlling narratives. And I helped him. God, Tom, I helped him destroy your reputation. She looked at me with devastated eyes. Can you forgive me? I wanted to say yes immediately, but the hurt ran too deep. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but we can figure it out. She nodded, crying harder. And for the first time in months, we sat together in shared understanding. The truth had finally broken through. The credit notice arrived 3 days later, forwarded from Rick's address, but listing Elaine's name as co-applicant. $15,000 in gambling debts, consolidated through a personal loan Rick had taken out 6 months ago. Elaine's signature appeared at the bottom, notarized and official. Except Elaine had never signed anything. She stared at the document, face white. He forged my name. Monica called that same afternoon, voice shaking. Tom, I found things. Bank statements Rick hid. Credit card bills. He's been lying about everything, the business, the income, all of it. She started crying. We're going to lose the house. He mortgaged it without telling me. How is that even legal? I called Marjorie immediately. She arrived at our house within an hour, reading through the documents with growing anger. This is fraud, she said flatly. Identity theft, forgery, possibly wire fraud if he used electronic banking. This isn't civil anymore. Tom, this is criminal. Elaine looked sick. He's my brother. I can't. He made you legally responsible for his gambling debts. Marjorie interrupted gently but firmly. If you don't act, you'll spend years paying for his mistakes. Your credit is already damaged. This notice means collectors are coming. The weight of Rick's betrayal kept growing, expanding beyond the watch into something darker and more destructive. He hadn't just stolen from my father's memory. He'd been systematically exploiting his entire family. What do we do? Elaine whispered. Marjorie looked at me. I looked at the watch on my desk, still ticking steadily. We expose everything, I said. Legally, properly, and completely. No more protecting him. Elaine closed her eyes, nodded once. Okay. The formal notice arrived at Rick's workplace on a Monday morning. Marjorie had drafted it carefully, citing financial misconduct, identity theft, and demanding immediate repayment of all fraudulent debts. She'd sent copies to Rick's employer, his mortgage company, and filed formal complaints with the police. It was surgical, devastating, and completely legal. Rick called that afternoon, voice raw. You're destroying me. You destroyed yourself, I said calmly. I'm just documenting it. His employer, a prestigious real estate firm downtown, suspended him pending investigation. The gambling debts triggered ethics violations. The forged documents opened criminal exposure. By Wednesday, Rick's carefully constructed life had crumbled. Monica filed for separation. Elaine's mother, faced with undeniable evidence, stopped returning Rick's calls. The family empire he'd built on lies collapsed in days. Elaine struggled with guilt. He's still my brother. He's a thief, I said gently, and he would have taken you down with him. She knew I was right, but that didn't make it easier. Mia, surprisingly, seemed relieved. I always felt weird around Uncle Rick, like he was performing, you know? Now I know why. The house felt different, lighter, like pressure had been released. Elaine and I moved carefully around each other, rebuilding trust brick by brick. But the foundation was there now, truth instead of convenient lies. One evening, she found me in my study, the watch open on my desk. Thank you, she said quietly, for not giving up, for being right, even when I couldn't see it. I closed the watch gently. Dad would have fought too. He taught me that truth matters more than comfort. She kissed my forehead, and I let myself believe we might be okay. The small-town paper ran the story 3 weeks later. Nothing sensational, just facts. Local man faces fraud charges in family dispute. It detailed the forged signatures, the gambling debts, the systematic exploitation. Rick's photo appeared beneath the headline, looking haggard. I didn't give any interviews. Neither did Elaine. We let the truth walk on its own legs, as Dad would have said. The responses varied. Some people apologized for doubting me. Others avoided eye contact, embarrassed by how quickly they believed Rick's lies. I didn't need their apologies. The vindication wasn't about them. It was about knowing I'd honored my father's memory properly. Church Sunday morning. Pastor Williams approached after service. Tom, I owe you an apology. I should have listened instead of assuming. I shook his hand. We all want to believe the best in people. Rick just exploited that. Mia posted something on social media, carefully worded but pointed. Learned an important lesson recently. Blood doesn't make family. Character does. It got shared dozens of times. The younger generation understood what their parents had missed. Rick himself disappeared from public view. Monica's divorce filing made local records. His real estate license faced suspension. The house went into foreclosure. Everything he'd built through manipulation and theft dissolved like morning fog. And I felt, strangely, no pleasure in his downfall. Just quiet certainty that justice, slow but inevitable, had arrived. The watch ticked steadily on my wrist, marking time honestly, the way it always had. Rick appeared at my door on a cold November evening, 3 months after everything collapsed. He looked terrible, unshaven, 20 pounds lighter, eyes hollow with desperation. Elaine answered the door, froze. You shouldn't be here. Please, Rick's voice cracked. I need help. The bank. They're threatening criminal charges. Monica won't talk to me. I just need, he looked past her at me. Tom, please. You could explain to them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I walked to the door slowly. Elaine stepped aside. Rick and I stood face to face, separated by the threshold. A misunderstanding? I kept my voice level. You pawned your integrity long before you pawned the watch, Rick. His face crumpled. I made mistakes. I know, but I'm family. Doesn't that count for something? You made me the villain for months. You turned my wife against me. You forged your signature. You stole from a dead man. I paused, letting each word land. Family isn't a shield against consequences. Dad taught me that. Rick's hand shook. I'm begging you. You should have thought about that before you betrayed everyone who trusted you. I stepped back. Go home, Rick. Face what you've done. He stood there a moment longer, searching for some crack in my resolve. Found none. Then he turned and walked away, shoulders hunched against the cold. Elaine watched him go, tears on her cheeks. That was hard. Yes. I closed the door gently, finally, but necessary. She nodded, and we stood together in the warm house, watching through the window as Rick's taillights disappeared. Justice doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like a door closing, quietly and completely, on a chapter that should have ended long ago. Spring brought new growth to the garden and healing to our home. Elaine and I rebuilt our marriage slowly, honestly, without the weight of her brother's manipulation between us. Mia thrived, relieved that family gatherings no longer required pretending everything was fine. Monica remarried eventually, someone steady and kind. Elaine's mother apologized stiffly, but sincerely. I should have listened to you, Tom. I was blinded by... She paused, searching for words. By wanting Rick to be better than he was. I understood that impulse. We all want to believe the best in people we love. The local paper never mentioned Rick again. He'd become background noise, a cautionary tale people whisper about in coffee shops. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to another state, was working construction, trying to start over. I hoped he succeeded, not for his sake, but because rehabilitation serves everyone better than destruction. The watch sat on my desk most days where I could see it. I'd had it professionally cleaned and serviced. The jeweler had marveled at its condition. They don't make them like this anymore. Your grandfather knew quality. I told him the whole story. He listened without judgment. Family heirlooms survive because someone fights for them, he said, handing it back. You're the fighter in yours. I accepted that role. Not gladly, but necessarily. Dad had been a fighter too, for justice, for truth, for things that mattered more than comfort. He'd taught me that some battles aren't optional. Pastor Williams invited me to speak at a men's group about forgiveness and justice. I declined at first, uncomfortable with attention. But Elaine encouraged me. Your story matters. Tell it. Sunday morning, I drove alone to the cemetery. The spring air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming dogwoods. Dad's headstone sat beneath an oak tree, simple granite marking 40 years of judicial service and 82 years of honest living. I knelt beside the grave, the watch heavy in my pocket. I got it back, Dad, I said quietly. The watch. Took a while, but it's home now. The wind rustled through oak leaves. Somewhere nearby, a cardinal sang. I pulled the watch out, studied the engraving again. For James Harrington, 1943. Time and tide. Grandpa's name. Dad's inheritance. Now mine. You were right about people. I continued. About how some folks will take what they can if you let them. But you were also right about standing firm. About fighting for what matters, even when everyone thinks you're wrong. A couple walked past on the cemetery path, noticed me talking, and moved on discreetly. I didn't care. Some conversations need speaking aloud. I almost lost Elaine over this. Almost let Rick win, because fighting seemed harder than surrendering. I traced the watch's engraving with my thumb. But then I'd remember you on the bench, making hard rulings when easier ones were available. You taught me that integrity isn't about convenience. The sun broke through clouds, warming the granite. I imagined Dad would appreciate that timing, his sense of dramatic irony, intact even in death. Rick's gone now. Destroyed himself, really. I just documented it. Everyone knows the truth. The watch is where it belongs. I paused, feeling emotion tighten my throat. I stayed decent, Dad, even when it hurt, even when it cost me. I stayed decent. Peace settled over me then, replacing the rage and grief that had driven these months. The battle was over. Truth had prevailed. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through simply refusing to let lies stand unchallenged. I stood slowly, knees protesting the cold ground. I'll pass it on right, I promise. When the time comes, it'll go to someone who understands what it means. What you meant. The cardinal sang again, bright and insistent. I chose to believe Dad approved. The watch needed work. Not much, just minor restoration. I took it to Gerald Morrison, a master horologist who'd worked on timepieces for 50 years. His shop smelled of oil and metal and time itself. Gerald examined the watch under magnification, making small approving sounds. Hamilton masterpiece. 1943. They made these to last generations. Someone's taken care of it. My father and his father before him. Gerald looked up, understanding in his weathered face. And now you. The repair took 3 weeks. When I picked it up, the watch gleamed like new, but with its history intact. Gerald had polished the gold, cleaned the mechanism, regulated the timing. It kept perfect time now, accurate to within seconds per day. I took the liberty, Gerald said, producing a small box. Inside was a new engraving, added to the watch's interior case. For Tom Harrington, who kept time honest. 2024. My vision blurred. Gerald, I didn't ask. No charge. Some things matter more than money. He closed the watch gently. This piece will outlive us all. But it'll carry your story now, alongside your grandfathers and fathers. That's worth preserving. I tried to thank him, failed, and settled for a handshake that communicated what words couldn't. In my truck, I held the watch up to afternoon light. For generations now marked in gold. For men who'd valued truth, justice, time measured honestly. That evening, I called Mia into my study. She entered curiously, phone in hand as always. Yeah. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat puzzled. I placed the watch between us. This has been in our family since 1943. Your great-great-grandfather carried it through World War II. Your great-grandfather wore it for 40 years as a magistrate. I fought to keep it this past year. I met her eyes. Someday it'll be yours. Mia's eyes widened. Mine? But I'm technically just... Family isn't about blood, I interrupted gently. It's about who stays, who fights, who honors what came before. You've been more family to me this year than people who share my DNA. She picked up the watch carefully, reverently. What if I lose it? Or break it? Then you'll fight to fix it, like I did. That's what this watch teaches. Not perfection. Persistence. I leaned forward. When you wear this, remember that truth keeps its own time. It's never too late to do what's right, and it's never too early to stand firm. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I'll take care of it. I promise. I know you will. She hugged me then, fierce and tight. And I understood what Dad had felt. Passing something irreplaceable forward. Trusting the next generation to value what shouldn't have a price. Months passed into years. Life settled into new rhythms. Steadier rhythms. Built on truth instead of convenient lies. Elaine and I rediscovered the marriage we'd nearly lost. Mia graduated high school, then college. Wearing the watch to both ceremonies. Rick sent a card once. No return address, just 3 words. I'm sorry, Tom. I filed away. Closure enough. The watch became part of our daily life again. Not hidden in a drawer or protected like a museum piece, but worn, used, marking real time. I wore it to court when testifying in other people's cases. Wore it to Mia's wedding 5 years later. Wore it to Elaine's mother's funeral when the time came. Each tick reminded me of Dad's steady presence, of lessons learned the hard way, of integrity measured in moments rather than grand gestures. Time doesn't lie. It simply passes, indifferent to our stories. But what we do with that time, how we mark it, whether we honor it honestly or squander it selfishly, that defines us. One evening, Mia visited with her daughter, my granddaughter Emma, 3 years old, curious about everything. Emma climbed into my lap, noticed the watch chain. What's that, Papa Tom? I pulled it out, let her examine it with sticky fingers. This is time, Emma. Real time. Not the numbers on a screen, but something passed down, person, hand to hand. She traced the engraving. not understanding the words, but feeling their importance. Pretty. Yes. And someday when you're older, it'll be yours. I looked at Mia, who nodded, smiling through tears. Your mama will teach you what it means. About staying when things get hard. About fighting for truth even when lies are easier. About keeping time honestly. Emma nodded seriously, the way 3-year-olds do when sensing adult importance. Then she hugged the watch, and me, and scrambled down to play. Mia stayed, watching her daughter. She'll understand eventually. You did, I said, when it mattered most. Outside, sunset painted the sky gold and amber. The watch ticked steadily in my hand, marking seconds that became minutes that became a life well lived. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. Rick had tried to steal my father's legacy. Instead, he'd taught me to value it more deeply, to fight for it, to pass it forward with intention and care. The watch would outlive me, outlive Mia, outlive Emma, but it would carry our stories, engraved in gold and memory. Stories of people who chose truth over comfort, who stayed when leaving was easier, who kept time honestly in a world that often doesn't. I wound the watch carefully, feeling its familiar resistance, hearing its reassuring tick resume. Time restored, legacy preserved, justice served. And in that simple ritual, repeated across generations, I found what I've been seeking all along. Not revenge against those who'd wronged me, but peace in knowing I'd honor those who trusted me. The watch ticked on, marking time the only way it knew how, steadily, honestly, forever forward.